Deforestation is also another important factor because the cutting down of trees on a large scale for fuel or land or other purposes has led to an increased amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere as more trees are burnt and fewer are in the ground to absorb all that excess. So this shows that there are many causes of human global warming. Agriculture practices, forests burning, transportation, and many other factors. But the main source of rising global temperatures we are seeing today is the burning of fossil fuels. Oh no, it's not letting me advance to the next. I think I skipped one. So we are currently spewing 152 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the thin shell of our atmosphere. And this is shocking. And this happens every 24 hours as if it were an open sewer. So for the skeptics out there, some say, some question whether climate change is actually real or not. We know for a fact the Earth is getting hotter. The world has already warmed about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. 15 of the 16 hottest years on record have occurred in the 21st century. Oceans are warming, which means less sea ice, particularly in the Arctic, where the extent and thickness of sea ice has declined so rapidly over the last several decades. This melting ice, including the glaciers around the world, which are retreating at an alarming rate, have accelerated the sea level rise. Higher levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has led oceans to become more acidic, around 30% more acidic. And this has had a tremendous impact on creatures living in the ocean. This greater acidity, for example, prevents shellfish from building healthy skeletons, and it's causing the coral reefs to bleach and die off. And this has ripple effects up and down the food chain. And that's just talking about the oceans. So this is supposed to be for some reason it's not playing. It's a little video that shows that as a result of the pollution being trapped in the atmosphere, just global temperatures have risen dramatically. So if we were able to see this graph, we would see it peak all the way up to the right. This was very shocking to me because to realize that USA ranks 24th in sustainability amongst the world. It's been the first country to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. It's the second biggest contributor to the climate crisis and is the top 5 fossil fuel producer. So this is horrible. Climate change is an imminent threat. It's happening now, it's real, but for most people, I believe climate change doesn't feel close to home. It doesn't really affect them. It feels distant in time and place. Because it's human nature, we tend to prioritize things that are directly affecting us in the present moment. Under 50% of Americans only feel like they are being harmed or affected in some way by climate change. And this was also shocking to me to discover. And future threats of climate change are often ignored, which is sad. And that is something that we wish to change. So question here is, why should we care? Why it is important that people care? And it's simple. The fact that the global temperature rise throws natural systems in the world off balance. So we're seeing already the rainstorms, severe droughts, cyclones, extreme heat waves, rising sea levels. World population around the world is being displaced because of this. There's been flooding of coastal areas, which have swallowed entire islands. And this last point is particularly hits home to us since we're all involved with the zoo and wildlife. we've seen populations of animals dying out and currently facing extinction. So changes in the climate and extreme weather have already begun to have an effect on biodiversity all across the globe. And climate change also worsens other threats like habitat destruction, overexploitation, as well as disease. So from the shrinking habitat of the polar bear to increased water scarcity driving the human-wildlife conflict, these changes will only become more pronounced in the years to come. The World Wildlife Fund is currently working to better understand how a changing climate is impacting wildlife, and it's developing and implementing adaptation solutions. They are actually assessing priority species to determine traits that may make them either resilient or vulnerable to changes in the climate. So climate change related threats to biodiversity are not far off in the future. They're not decades away or even years away, they're happening now. In recent assessments, the International Union for Conservation of Nature emphasized this alarming impact of climate change on species happening right now. So they estimated around 73 species on the red list have already declined in population over the past year alone. So this is devastating. So we are now risking losing up to 50% of all land-based species in this century. Heat itself is a problem in so many parts of the world and many parts of the country. And the heat affects not only people, but animals, crops, and our weather. Climate change, along with other factors such as ecosystem loss, is contributing to the worst extinction event since the extinction of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And I think part of the problem is that people don't actually realize this or aren't aware. So these are only examples of some of the species that are affected by climate change, and many of these we are happy to home at our zoo. And the wildlife is making these efforts and conducting risk assessments for wildlife to understand how the climate change is harming various species that we're actually trying to protect. One example is the nightingale, which has been affected already by climate change. So it seems like their wings have been gotten shorter over the past several years, and this has made their migration harder and therefore less likely to survive due to these rising temperatures. The effects of climate change has already been observed in the Chihuahuan Desert. The desert ecosystems are very sensitive indicators of climate change, and small changes either in temperature or precipitation can have very big effects on physical resources and biological communities. The Chihuahuan Desert is considered one of the most diverse deserts of the world and a critical reservoir for conserving biodiversity. The changing patterns in temperatures and rainfall have this potential to shift the distribution of plants and wildlife. So one example has already been seen. Despite being mobile, birds are affected by climate change, and some of them may require existing high elevation biomes for their life cycles, and they are sensitive to temperature. And one example of this is the Mexican spotted owl, which is intolerant of warm temperatures, and its distribution is already being affected. It's being reduced. So what it comes down to is that it's our choice. We all have a choice. Do we want to condemn our children, our grandchildren, future generations to live in a world that has been devastated by this climate crisis? Or do we want to be recognized as a generation that discovered the courage to act and rose to solve the greatest challenge? Well, at least I believe this is the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced. Question, for me, the choice is easy, but then I think a lot of us may feel overwhelmed or helpless and we don't really know what to do. So one thing is to accept that climate change is happening. The carbon pollution driving climate change stays in the atmospheres for hundreds of years. So even if everybody would stop producing carbon, it is very difficult to stop the crisis in its tracks. But what we can do is stop adding more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere so the warming slows and the planet has a chance to recover. So how much the climate warms in the future is really up to us. And that falls back on the choices we make every single day. But then it's also hard. What should I choose? I don't know what is the best choice and why. But first step is realize we do have a choice, and then educate ourselves to make the right choices. So living a more sustainable lifestyle, I think can often seem like for people, they may think they need to make a huge drastic change and, go live in the middle of the desert or in the forest and, relinquish all their current lifestyle. And as a matter of fact, you don't need to do that. It's the little things that we can do consistently every single day that I believe eventually add up and make a difference. So these are some examples that I will go through that I have implemented in my lifestyle, and I've, my family has, incorporated them and my children into how we live our lives. And for example, planting trees or starting a pollinator garden. Educating younger generations, I think, is so important. Starting an eco garden or veggie garden at home. Avoiding using single-use plastic items. Being aware of the recycling myths that are out there. Choosing zero waste items that are currently on the market. Trying to migrate to a more plant-based diet. Trying composting. Shortening your food chain by shopping local. Unplugging appliances that are not being used. Reducing your water usage. Reusing and repurposing items. All of these things I will go through and give you examples. So I started my veggie garden when the pandemic broke out a few months back, and it's been such a rewarding experience. And it's easy to start at home, no matter how much space you have. If you have a little balcony or a patio or a windowsill, there's always options. And if you have kids at home, they love to do and participate in this activity. And then when you actually get to harvest your veggies or herbs, it's so much fun. So it's something that anybody can try at home. And it not only allows you to enjoy your veggies or herbs or fruits at home, it also shortens your food chain. So this diagram explains and kind of shows in a very visual way all of the resources that are needed for example, when you order food delivery, all the resources that are needed to actually bring that food from the farm where it was cultivated to your plate. And so this also is something that's positive for the environment. Educating at an early age, I think, is extremely important. It fosters this connection to nature and wildlife and establishes this respect for every single living thing on our planet. And that's something that children can, grow up with and really incorporate and, carry throughout their lifetime. And there's many countries now, like Italy, which actually require schools to teach climate change. And I would, love to see every nation in the world doing this. I think it's so important. So bottom thing here is consumers, we have a choice. So for example, I was shocked to find out that, sticky notes and toothpaste tubes are almost impossible to recycle. And so it's simple. Once you know that these items are so difficult to recycle, you can just refrain for purchasing them. And now out there in the market, there's so many other alternatives. So receipts are a huge thing. It's simple. Do you actually need a receipt? No, most of the times you don't. And many establishments now offer the email option. And this way, if we say just, no, I don't need a receipt, you're avoiding a lot of wastes. And because receipts often end up in the landfill or actually on the floor, polluting our streets. So I think the common culture is to believe that if you throw it into the recycle bin, it's taken care of and you're doing your part in taking care of the planet and you're being responsible. But it's actually not. It's not sustainable. It can only be recycled a maximum of 2 to 3 times. It lasts forever in the environment. And to start off with, most of the plastics are originated from crude oil, which generated greenhouse gases to start off with. And so many times when we don't rinse a recyclable item, it will end up in the landfill or being incinerated. So it's bottom line, stay away from plastic items. Just do not purchase them. So the myth is that recycling is the solution. And I think this is something that started off in our culture a few years back. But the fact is most plastic is too expensive to recycle and it's just not the best choice. There are so many eco-friendly alternatives now on the market. These are just a few examples of items that we can substitute that do not have a detrimental effect on the environment. Grocery bags, there's many shampoo bars that do not come like traditional shampoo in a plastic bottle. There's metal straws, there's reusable reusable containers for liquids, for drinking water, for us ladies that we use, wipes to wipe off our makeup. There's now reusable facial rounds that can be washed and reused many, many times. And there's so many biodegradable options for toothbrushes, for example. Another thing that we can incorporate as consumers into our daily lives are paper items like napkins, to wipe surfaces, or any paper item that we use at home can be replaced with a cloth item. What makes it even better is if we choose to throw out an old t-shirt and instead cut it up and use it to turn it into a cloth, then you're repurposing an item that you would, end up in the landfill anyway, but you're, using it for another purpose and you're eliminating paper usage. So our diet has a huge impact on the environment, and I was shocked to find cheese on the second down from beef. So our choices in our diet also have an effect on the environment. And maybe we're not quite ready to go all vegan, all plant-based, which is fine. But maybe we can start by reducing our meat consumption and implementing this Meatless Monday trend that has been going on. And this is not only good for the environment, but it's also good for our health. Composting is another thing that we can do, which is great to reduce food waste and lower your carbon footprint. It's really easy. It saves food scraps from going to waste and producing gases in the atmosphere. It's also beneficial for your veggie garden or herb garden that you have at home. And there's several myths that people, tend to believe, that it's complicated, that it smells bad, that it's expensive, that you need a huge backyard, but in reality, it's not. If you're not quite ready, for somebody that tells you, no, I don't want to compost, I'm not ready to do that, I don't have the time, then you can always, ask a friend that is composting and you can take your scraps to them, or even better, we can, accept donations at the zoo for items to place into our eco garden that we have there. Getting creative with items such as like this wrap that the tangerines or clementines come in. Repurposing items is a great way also to reducing waste instead of just throwing it out. As I mentioned earlier, deforestation is a major contributor to the climate crisis. So forests, as we know, are nature's greatest technology for combating climate change. They naturally absorb CO2 and they reduce the amount of this heat trapping gas in the atmosphere. The problem is that, deforestation has now been, rampant all over the planet. And it also leads to habitat destruction, which has a detrimental effect on many animal species. And this has been brought about by the palm oil industry. So once again, as consumers, we have a choice. So when it comes to palm oil, I recommend people stay away from purchasing unsustainably sourced palm oil. And you can always look for that logo to make sure it has been, you know, sustainably sourced, because manufacturers and companies have, you know, gone around and developed sneaky ways of incorporating palm oil into the ingredient lists of many products. So you also have to be aware as a consumer how palm oil can be, you know, listed on the ingredient list, and stay away, because the widespread loss of these irreplaceable and biodiverse rainforests is just devastating, not only to the environment, but to so many species which are currently endangered, like the orangutans and the tigers and elephants, just to mention a few. So bottom line, what I want people to realize, and my objective is to raise awareness in the community that as consumers, we have a choice to purchase and use items that have a positive impact on the environment and on our wildlife. It's just a matter of knowing what to choose and why. So I believe we don't need, you know, a few thousand people leading a perfectly sustainable lifestyle and, you know, going zero waste. The bigger effect we can achieve is by millions of people doing it imperfectly, because these small choices that we can practice in our lives on a daily basis have the power, in my opinion, to make a difference. I believe that nature connects us all to wildlife, to our planet, and it's time to take care of it. Small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Pam, for sharing all of that knowledge with us about, you know, climate change, you know, what's happening out there, and of course, some things that we can do to make those small changes in our everyday lives. Because we are running a couple minutes late, if anybody does have any questions, if you could type them into the chat with your email address, and then if it's okay if we answer those afterwards, we're ready to head into that next presentation. I know we had technical.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.